So today we're going to talk about a company called Divergent, which is creating an end-to-end software and hardware production system for industrial digital manufacturing. It's called the Divergent Adaptive Production System, or DAPS. Now, this is important because it's about allowing flexibility in our industrial supply chain. The company has done a lot to build one of the fastest cars on the planet, maybe the fastest car on the planet, and they're also doing a bunch in the national security space. To learn more, we spoke to their head of Aerospace and Defense, Air Force Colonel, retired Nathan Diller. Now, Nate's a really interesting person to talk to for a variety of reasons, beyond even his current position at Divergent. He, before joining the company, was on the staff of the U.S. House of Representatives Appropriations Subcommittee on Defense, or HAC-D, where he helped develop and oversee the budget. And he also was previously the director of AFWorks, the Air Force program that managed and expanded the SBIR, or the Small Business Innovation Research budget. And this comes after 22 years of active duty service in the Air Force, where he was a test pilot. He served as the director of aeronautics in the White House. He served on the Joint Staff, the Air Force Rapid Capabilities Office, the Strategic Capabilities Office. The list goes on and on. He knows this ecosystem deeply. So enjoy my conversation with Nate, where we talk not only about Divergent, but about the state of the innovation ecosystem and of technology in service of America's national defense.
Thousands of companies show up to sell their technology to the U.S. Department of Defense each year, but so few will transition from proof of concept to true production across the valley of death. The select few who do, their stories are rarely told. Until now, is Crossing the Valley.
All right, Nathan Diller, welcome to Crossing the Valley. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, excited to be here now.
So there are so many different conversations we could have here, sir, because, we could go back, we could do the retrospective on your AFWorks days. We could talk about right now with the government shutdown, with a reauthorization in the works. We could talk about your time at HAC-D, the House Appropriations Subcommittee for Defense. But I think what we're going to talk about for the most part, maybe we'll talk a little bit about those. We're going to focus on your current role with Divergent. Fascinating company, fascinating time. You're at the moment, at a great place at this moment of reindustrial excitement here in the United States. And so tell us a little bit about what Divergent is all about. What's the why for this company?
Yeah, thanks again for the opportunity to be here and for the great work you're doing in helping this reindustrialization and really getting some of the best entrepreneurs across America in motion in supporting the work that is needed for national security. I started with Divergent about 18 months ago. The problem that Kevin Zinger set out to solve was, how do we really create an entirely different approach to digital manufacturing, a fixtureless capability that is incredibly adaptable. So the Divergent Adaptive Production System is just that takes the great things that have happened in software to ideally make hardware move at the pace of software. And so how do you have at the front end an opportunity to do digital engineering around structures to find the best possible optimized structures? How do you take that structure then and use the software as well to put it in a printable form? We then print, so we are able to go very optimally stack those different products into a print bed. And then the last part is the assembly. And so when you put that all together, a fully digital design process, a digital production process that allows rapid iteration and then very rapid scaling through that approach, all through the digital thread. And that began in the auto industry. Over a couple years ago, they pivoted then. I wouldn't say pivoted because they are still very much here in Torrance driving those Zinger 21Cs out the door, fastest production car on the planet, 253 miles an hour, 0 to 60, 1.88 seconds. The 3D printed car and the parts that are 3D printed, not the entire thing. This is all about the product. It is about not science experiments and advanced manufacturing, but literally industrial scale in advanced manufacturing. And so initially in the auto industry and now in aerospace and defense.
aside from desperately wishing that we had done this in person so I could have come out and seen that car, raced it around, which we'll have to do another time. Maybe give us a little bit about why digital manufacturing, like why is this important right now in the United States amidst all of the conversations around, hey, we've exported so much of our supply, or we've kind of hemorrhaged so much of our supply chain, we've exported so much of our manufacturing. What about this process, the DAPS process that you all have created, is so unique and so important?
Yeah, I mean, part of this coming when I was at AFWorks and seeing a lot of great companies that had great ideas for many years. In the United States, we took this approach to our industrialization of we make the ideas, someone else makes the product, right? We're the idea generator. The part that's lost on that is the amount of ideas that happen actually when you're doing the hardware. And so the loss of intellectual property from not actually engaging in the development of that hardware directly. And so when you look at the digital, from a digital perspective, what does it allow you to do? It allows you to take America's, again, software advantage and turn it into hardware advantage. It's interesting when you think about being able to optimize capital. You know, having come from government, spent a lot of time thinking about how to optimize taxpayer dollars. If I have to go build a bespoke factory for every system that I am purchasing, I end up having a lot of CapEx that potentially becomes not so useful, very low return, if I need to be very agile and shift quickly, or if I need to scale quickly. And so the overarching thesis is that if I have an adaptable production system where I can print hypercar frames in the morning and cruise missiles in the afternoon, I leave a massive amount of optionality in that industrial base. I leave a huge opportunity to be able to aggregate resources and share risk to create, an ability to scale in a particular area. When I look at the ability to create deterrence against an adversary, part of that deterrent effect comes from an ability to adapt, right? If I go back and look at the OODA loop, right, it's the opportunity to move faster and create those decision cycles faster. And so if I'm trying to create deterrence, I want some of the uncertainty. The best way of having uncertainty is by having an adaptable factory. If I have a limited number of factories for a specific types of things, it's pretty clear to an adversary what I'm going to be able to do. The challenge to that type of deterrence, the two entities that really dislike that uncertainty besides the enemy is the bureaucracy. So there's a big amount of work to do to create a bureaucracy that has that same agility as a factory. And an industry that has been facilitized for bespoke manufacturing, obviously, that's also they're looking for returns on the factories that have been established. And so how do you make sure that those factories can still be incredibly useful, supercharging them in the areas where adaptability still aligns to the approach for those legacy systems? And then how do you create a bureaucracy that understands how to do qualification and adoption of these new techniques at scale?
These are big problems. You've worked on them from a couple different facets, the executive branch, legislative branch, now private industry. I'm just curious about you in all of this. Like, how did you make the decisions that, of from going even from the Air Force to Congress and then from Congress to not just the private sector, but this company in particular? I'm kind of curious what the thought process was about how you sequenced that.
Yeah, I would love to say that it was deliberate in some big plan that I somehow or another architected, but as these things often are, it ended up being a couple of family situations that drove me from some jobs that I really loved doing, both at AFWorks as I retired and on Capitol Hill. Incredible teams in both accounts, wildly mission driven in both of those instances. And yeah, probably were it not for some family challenges on the home front, most of which health related and are better now, likely would be at either of those stops, because they were just exciting problems to work on. When I left, originally started out just doing some multi-client work because I needed some flexibility on the family front. Eventually Kevin and Lou Gazinger were kind enough to kind of leave that flexibility, but they were very interested in having more of my attention, and I was really thrilled to focus attention on something that I had seen challenges when I was in the Pentagon on scalability, challenges when I moved over to AFWorks on the difficulty of doing hard tech, the number of companies who had very significant challenges raising capital, especially if you have to raise that capital to go build a bespoke factory, to go build your first prototype. The challenges when I was on Capitol Hill of seeing, a lot of great products in instances from the defense primes, but for lack of, because of a lot of the offshoring, intercastings and forgings, an inability to actually drive increased numbers when we gave increased funding. And so I think I was seeing this problem kind of over and over and over. Tried to approach it from many different facets, from requirements when I was on the joint staff, from being able to create alternative paths for entry when I was in AFWorks, and scaling through the StratFi process, eventually to the fielding budget, the colorless dollars that we were able to get through on Capitol Hill. So I would say, I've been incredibly blessed to be able to kind of follow what, a consistent thesis that, fundamentally is, since I worked for General Dunford on the Joint Staff, growing concern about the decline in America's ability to deter, largely because of America's inability to manufacture, inability to create that deterrence with the hardware. And I mean, this is it really is, I think, a crisis when you look at, we're at 15%, less than 15% of world's global manufacturing. China's at 45%. That's an inversion of just 30 years ago. So there's not a great history of success for a country that doesn't maintain that. And I think there is an incredible group of companies out there, from big to small, that are ready to really change the crisis into what I see as an incredible renaissance in American manufacturing. I think it's happening right now. Many of the conditions are set. And so just thrilled to have lucked out and be in some of these interesting places at interesting times.
It is, what's the saying? May we all live in interesting times, or something like that. Yeah, no, for sure. The problems are acute. I think what's changed in the last couple of years is there's this kind of bipartisan consensus that this is actually a problem, whereas before it seemed like it was niche communities. Now there's this general recognition. And you're seeing a lot of energy, a lot of capital, a lot of young people, a lot of talent pouring in to the space. So it's super cool. I want to talk about the way that you guys actually have gone to market with the strategy, Nate, because I think there's a lot of different ways you could go here. There's some of these companies now are just focusing on one part. Some of these companies are focusing on that automation layer and kind of going into existing shops and into existing factories and just trying to accelerate the implementation of robotics. Others are, there's kind of this legacy of vertical integration in American manufacturing. And so it's just kind of interesting to see how you all have chosen to go about it, and some of the ways that you've focused either on selling directly to the government or really through partners. And so I'm curious, how would you characterize Divergent's approach to the federal and the defense markets? What are the different kind of channels or strategies that you all have employed? And then maybe we'll follow one through as an example.
Sure. There's been this ongoing discussion is we don't have an innovation challenge. I say we don't have a technology challenge, but we certainly have an adoption challenge. And so this is not just a defense challenge, but I think more broadly it's an U.S. aerospace sector challenge, where we have established, for all the right reasons, a very thick process for ensuring that when something goes in the air, it ends up where we intend for it to go, ideally back to a very safe landing, particularly if humans are involved. I think that there probably has not been the movement to take the hardware that flies and the associated qualifications for that hardware into the digital age at the pace that we could or that we should. And it's resulted, I think, in a pretty gross stagnation of our ability to actually create the innovations that we could or should in the U.S. aerospace sector in particular. And so the approach to that, we're acutely aware of the challenge. One, the necessity to ensure that you're not compromising on things that involve the safety of human life. I think interesting is What happened in the auto sector with Divergent, again, they had focused primarily on that auto sector, and you can see the public releases with Aston Martin, Bugatti, McLaren, where the founding team here did incredible work creating extensive data sets to be able to show a degree of quality that entrusted this company to build the most safety critical parts for literally the most well-known names around the world in the auto industry. And so the degree of discipline, everyone talks about innovation. A part of real innovation is actually real discipline in the right areas, right? And so what the Zinger family did in establishing this tech stack that allows the collection of that data is essential. When you think about the go-to-market, if I'm trying to go from, let's call it an industry 3.0 and leaping into an industry 5.0, where I think, we could argue semantics about that, but that some would say American aerospace is, in many instances, a generation or two behind the state of the art. You're not going to necessarily solve that overnight. And so part of it is how to go fly things that don't have that safety criticality, where you're putting a human life at risk. You go collect data from that, you feed that to the regulators, and you slowly start to build up this entire case that indeed, something that has been 3D printed does not necessarily just explode as soon as it gets in flight. There's a piece of it that you slowly work your way up kind of that value chain, initially working directly business to business. But at the same time, if these companies are not seeing some demand signal, a demand signal for the product and an ability to actually qualify that product, they're going to be hesitant to actually go and start building those products themselves. And so to that end, we've started doing the work on the government side with some of the research laboratories and direct contracts there to look at the qualification, in particular the airworthiness. Air Force background, there's comparable things. Right, when I start to look at a maritime industrial base, there's maybe interesting things when I look at some of the nuclear reactor opportunities that are out there. Any of these highly regulated markets need some level of this. I'd say for us, we've been primarily focused on those things that fly right now, and simultaneously going and helping build the case with the government experts, the science, from a science and technology perspective, in the airworthiness and regulatory perspective, and then eventually getting some baseline success in the government being real adopters. We got a C-130 hubcap through an airworthiness process, right? So those types of things slowly start to build up this core set of artifacts to say what is in this industry 5.0 actually can be taken to scale. It can be trusted. It could be your first stop when you're trying to solve some of the most complex manufacturing challenges that you have. And that buy-in from the government, I think it's important. This is a little bit of the thesis that we continued from programs like Agility Prime in AFWorks, that if I can slowly burn down the technical risk, the regulatory risk, and that early financial risk, now I start to open up these markets that otherwise might be consumed. And you could certainly say that was the case with like our small drone industry. So how do I get the government to play a partner there where they're opening up, especially in these highly regulated market areas, that opportunity to innovate in market capture, the opportunity to innovate in tech adoption?
I think there's a lot in there that we can pull apart. I think what maybe I'll ask you about is, you all have, just from some of the publicly announced contracts, some stuff direct to government, some stuff through partners. You've got this Eglin Wide Agile acquisition contract, IDIQ, with a pretty sizable ceiling there. You've got some other DARPA long shot subcontractor agreement, America Makes cooperative agreement, and then notably a partnership that you all have talked a little bit about with General Atomics, specifically to use the manufacturing and design methods for some of their UAS, their unmanned aerial system structure parts. I think that's particularly interesting, and maybe even it goes beyond that. So tell us how there's a lot y'all have put out, and there's so much more that I'm sure you will do. What does it look like to formulate some of these early partnerships? And maybe we take the General Atomics example of just what did it look like to open that relationship? How did it actually come about?
One of the things I've enjoyed about this job is a continuation of a thesis. I've had the chance to work with the big defense primes for years, flight tested Edwards Air Force Base, flying the jet that they built. There are other instances where I I have been able, obviously working with the startups and the mid-tier companies. What's been encouraging is just the great innovation that you can find across these different sectors. With General Atomics, that was before my time here at Divergent, but they continue to be very engaged with us. They were kind of the first aerospace and defense partner and saw, to a large degree, an opportunity that we had, faster, better, cheaper. And so they basically kind of gave us a challenge and said, hey, can you turn this flying aircraft design, at a pace to, very, very aggressive pace from the government. And again, this was, a huge congrats to my team who was there before of being able to go exercise this process of the design, print, and assemble at a pace that I think, was really surprising to what General Atomics had seen traditionally. They were able to do it, when you look at the number of test coupons and the rigor that we were able to show with a lot of the engineering data behind it. And so part of it just becomes, how can we slowly become a trusted partner, kind of piece by piece, part by part. I think it's what's allowed us to move at the pace that we are in many instances because they see us very much as that trusted partner through data. And, we're able to move it up. Again, the joy of kind of being in a venture-backed company is you get a certain appetite and attitude to the team that's just excited to go move on these problems. So
no small bets.
Small bets, that's right. So it's been, exciting to see how quickly. It's encouraging, whether it's with the startup or the defense prime, to see the young engineers get to go kind of play with this tool set to see how quickly you can. Yeah. Each story is a little bit different of how we're going from one place to the next between these companies. But, fundamentally, we're looking to be a partner solving incredibly hard problems and hopefully turning ideas into reality much faster than they would have otherwise been able to. And that's just a fun world to live in.
No doubt. Let's see if we can get a little bit specific on this. Like, what does it actually take to get a part to become a accredited, trusted part of a prime like General Atomics, their supply chain? Like, what are the steps that you all have to go through from first conversation to, okay, this is now a part of the Q9 or something like that, where it's in production?
Yeah, you get a spectrum at the beginning of, is this just a build to print, right? Are they just, is it, to what degree do they need something quickly and it needs to be a particular shape? And we certainly can do those, and so being able to turn those quickly is how do you build trust in different areas? Is it something that is going to need to be super high quality, safety critical part? Is this a prototype? In some instances, it's going back and walking through our material qualification processes to be able to show that we've done the different types of environmental testing and able to identify at the micron level, build by build, the quality. And so it depends, sometimes it's complexity. We say complexity is free in 3D print. And so it ends up being, interesting parts, I would say, actually for like thermal management of wild shapes that are just very hard to manufacture by other means. I think the ones that we probably feel like we add the most value to is kind of that clean sheet where someone comes to us and says, we have to move quickly. We think if we design to advanced manufacturing at the beginning, let's do this in a partnership way. What we find is the ability to increase ranges significantly because of increased fuel available. We're able to reduce mass significantly, being able to create agility on different types of propulsion or different types of sensors. Move forward into production quickly, knowing that if you need to make some changes, even once you get into production, those changes can happen at the pace of software. So, I would say it very much depends on the type of problem that those partners are looking to solve. We probably have a few different classes at the high level, but each kind of brings their own interesting challenge, engineering challenge, making sure it's a business case challenge, right? Making sure that it is cost competitive with the alternatives. Very often it's a scheduling challenge. We're trying to meet this deadline. Being able to compete across those different metrics, I think it is where so many are starting to see the value in the tech stack that we bring forward.
So if on one end of the spectrum is, how the government buys things, by RFP, by notices that go out, have this kind of paper-based award process that takes weeks and months and sometimes years to go through all the submissions and evaluate the different respondents. And on the other end is, as I understand it, almost the casual economy of machine shops, where it's still a lot of orders taken by phone and notes scribbled on notepads. It's not always fully managed in any kind of digital platform. Where's your client base? Did General Thomas put out an RFI onto the street to see who could do this, or is this personal relationships where you're getting phone calls and just trying to see if you can meet their needs?
We have a webpage. Some of our most interesting and fruitful requests have come completely cold off the webpage.
Really? The contact us page is hot, huh?
Yeah, it's shocking and exciting. It's like a little gift to go open some of those up. Most of them are off of referrals, right? Nothing better than a happy customer going and telling somebody else that you should consider this. So all of those are super interesting ways of, in some instances, the government actually making suggestions, because there is a growing appetite. I think that the government, the value proposition, that we talked to a little bit earlier, being able to use taxpayer dollars more efficiently. And I think many in the government have seen some of the programs that we've done. And so those referrals have been fantastic. Part of it, until you actually come and see the factory and what we're doing, often, when I was in AFWERX, I put a lot of money into digital engineering and then 3D printing and robotic assembly. To see that all come together and to go see a 253 mile an hour car that comes out that was, breaking every track record across California. If you want to go look up an interesting documentary that just came out earlier this year, being able to see the speed that was able to happen with, a team that's not been doing this for decades. So the results are the fun part, when you go see the very light footprint that a small company can have. And now, you kind of this democratization of manufacturing in a way that really hasn't been possible before because of that low capex that's required. So, many different paths on that one. Maybe we start to kind of solidify, like, here's the lane that folks should drive through. But so far, it's been, each of the stories is actually a ton of fun and exciting to see the success stories that come out of it.
Variety is the spice of life. One of the things that's interesting to me, you mentioned being a venture-backed company. You guys raised a ton of money. I think it's something like $700 million. It's also got the family business thing going on. You got the cars named after the founder. This is really interesting in kind of the industrial America and even the defense, this industrial base. You got, so many of the companies that are still contributing to major programs, whether it's the Ostman family in Sierra Nevada, the Zingers, and there's many others. Everything from, just kind of R&D engineering shops to now large venture-backed companies. What's the nature of this as a family business? Like, is there something about the culture that feels different because of the family element, or is it just, hey, run like every other venture-backed company? I'm kind of curious.
It's in the Zinger family, kind of their commitment to mission on it, is exciting. Kevin Zinger was a Marine. He had family, parents, and brothers who had served as well. And so it's incredibly mission driven. And I think that just kind of permeates the business. The culture and the mission driven sense here is encouraging this continuity of mission that I've been lucky enough to be part of. So it's been great.
So Nate, a ton of money. It's no small bet. When Divergent wins, in like a line or two, what is the future that you want to see?
Absolutely. Near term, weapons at volume to preserve peace, to get deterrence. Long-term, weapons, cars, airplanes at scale to bring back our manufacturing renaissance that wins prosperity. So peace and prosperity, that's all I'm asking for.
Just a little peace and prosperity. I love that answer. I dare someone to disagree and to take umbrage with the Divergent mission. It's very cool. You mentioned current events and you mentioned kind of the state of the world. The state of the world here at home in the United States, as we're recording this now, who knows what will happen by the time this airs, but the government is shut down. A program that you spent a lot of time with, the SBIR program, we're not sure about its future. I know you're busy, you got a day job now, but if we were armchair quarterbacking it when you're putting your feet up at home at the end of a long day, I'm sure, Nate, that you're scrolling news sources to get the latest from your friends up on the Hill. What do you make of, let's start with SBIR first, then we can talk about it, this shutdown. I know that's everybody's favorite topic right now. You got Senator Ernst the Innovate Act, trying to make some reforms there. You know this program better than anybody. What do you make of the current fight, and what do you think should happen?
Yeah, I mean, look, fundamentally, I think you have to go back to what was the core purpose in 1982. Maybe there's just fundamental disagreements on what that purpose was, right? A little bit of first principles. By and large, what this ought to do is unlock small companies with big ideas to become big companies that create a prosperous American future. And having those SBIRs there, I don't know that it was intended to be kind of this recurring pot for research and development into perpetuity. And I think to a large degree, that's the core of the disagreement there. It's a great program. I mean, the number of companies in particular over the last 5 years, if you were to look at the large new players in the defense business, it'd be very hard pressed to find many of them that did not have one of these open topic SBIRs, because it's trying to create that access to capital that's ready to take a high risk. And this is an instance where the government is taking a high risk. So yeah, we certainly need that reauthorization to happen as soon as possible, I think, to continue to unlock American entrepreneurialism. I'll pause on that one. I don't know if we want to continue going across the landscape of that particular hill, but at least a starting point on SBIRs, and thanks to the folks who've been working hard to get that back on track.
Yeah, we'll see what happens. For what it's worth, from some of what I heard, is that there's a little bit of an incentive misalignment here, where the big companies that are maybe against it and maybe excited that this isn't going to be reauthorized, and I want to say they're all against it, but the ones that are very actively lobbying their Congress members and very actively making their opinions heard. The diffuse array of small companies that have benefited from the program in the past, for exactly this reason. Maybe they're not sitting there living in SBIR land forever. They're moving on to other things, or maybe they're focused on lobbying, but not on this topic. They're focused on the congressional ads. So there's a bit of dynamic where you've got, some folks who are maybe louder. This is another example, just like this podcast. The loudest voices are not always the only ones. They're certainly not always the correct ones. The loudest voices in this case may be kind of represented on one side of the spectrum. So we'll see what happens. In innovation land, so to speak, or the land of new misfit toys, most folks at least nominally seem to be in favor. So we'll see where that goes. How about the shutdown as a whole, Nate? I mean, you've seen the pain on the inside. We don't need to sit here and tell Congress to reopen the government. I think people know where industry stands on this. I am curious, though, if you give us like an insider's look of what does it look like in the executive branch when the government actually shuts down? Like, how do you do, what is your job day to day? What does it become?
Oh, well, I mean, it's a spectrum depending on the particular rules. I'm sure those in uniform. I think it's just hard because you're set back in many areas in terms of, you're sitting there sprinting all the way, and then all of a sudden it's just stop everything. Some of that's intentional, right? If you open up the aperture to Capitol Hill, there are some up there who don't want shutdowns to be easy, specifically because it encourages bad behavior and you just get more shutdowns. And then you almost start getting like an alternate form of government. And so, have this peculiar thing where you're trying to make this hard to try to avoid this bad behavior. And so when you actually get the bad behavior, boy, it does sting a bit. So, democracy in action, I guess Federal Democratic Republic in action. I would love to see better behavior, especially, just peculiar ways of use of that leverage that it's incredibly expensive. So with, hopes for quick changes there and on-time budgets in the future, but we'll see.
Yeah, we could keep saying it. Nobody cares. Anyways, they're going to do what they're going to do. But it doesn't hurt to make the opinions heard. Amen. As I know we're gonna move to close here shortly, I am curious for you to zoom out and kind of give us your view of the landscape, and specifically companies trying to supply America's industrial base, not just the defense industrial base, but the industrial base writ large. What have you seen in the time you've been in this fight now for quite some time, since you were flying planes and training on it, over a decade, I believe. As you've seen this thing evolve, what do you think is, in the current moment we're in, what's like the cause for optimism, and what's the most pressing problem
Well, I mean, the cause for optimism is you have kind of this reindustrialized effort. It's a shame that we've hemorrhaged to the degree that we've had, but, seeing young kids that are ready to go build, right? They're building companies, they're building hardware. That's encouraging. So I think, are there gaps in the supply chain, the critical minerals? How do we go deeply into just shedding not just hard tech, but hard mining? Like, where are you getting the raw materials from? How do we be, deliberate about that? How do we use, 21st century techniques to regain a competitive advantage, to do it in a way that does not have all the detractors that caused regulators to almost regulate America out of having that competitive advantage? I mean, a reason for optimism, but those are long, hard tasks, and it requires a degree of persistence that hopefully both, on the founder, on the industry side is there. I think things like the Office of Strategic Capital and some of the long-term patient capital that can be there to see these projects to fruition is not going to be easy. And so I'm excited to see the folks that have the grit, and they're going to make it happen. It needs to be done, and it's a great thing for the country when it's done correctly. I think there'll be some folks that are much better off because they were persistent. So that'll be exciting to see those stories and have them show that success.
Hard challenges, hard times breed strong people. And so undoubtedly, iron sharpens iron. Nate, we will let you go here, sir. Before you do, if folks are interested, inspired, want to learn more about Divergent, where should they go?
Well, we've got that webpage, divergent3d.com. Certainly there we capture those. I keep a pretty full inbox on LinkedIn. I think I capture most of them, so feel free to reach out direct to me there on LinkedIn. For folks that are ready to build, they want a prototype that's ready to go to scale, please hit us up. We are partnering with great companies out there to build great things. So excited to do that. Feel free to hit us up at both those locations, and look forward to building together.
Alrighty, sir. We look forward to seeing what you build next. Thanks for making time. We're rooting for you.
Thanks so much, Noah.